Hi everyone, I am Paulina and I welcome you to my channel Polymer Creations. I recently conducted a survey on my Instagram about baking polymer clay. Thank you so much for all your questions. In this video, I will try to answer some of them. In the beginning, I planned to shoot one big video on this topic, but soon I realized there is a lot of information that it was necessary to divide the video into parts. In this video, we will talk about baking temperature and time. Video sound will be slightly accelerated. There is so much information, I didn't want this video to be 3 hours. If something is not clear, please click on the subtitles button below. Subtitles are in English and Russian. Let's get started!
Polymer clay is a wonderful material from which you can make various products, such as jewelry, keychains, sculptures, magnets, miniature food for dolls, and so on. The best part is that it is very easy to work with it. But if it's not an air clay, it must be baked. For different manufacturers, the optimum baking temperature can vary. This is written on the packaging, so make sure to read and follow these recommendations. Pay attention not only to the temperature, but also to the thickness of the polymer clay. The thicker clay, the longer it takes to bake. The average baking temperature is 230 to 265 Fahrenheit, or 110 to 130 Celsius. If polymer clay is baked at a low temperature, it will not bake and will eventually become brittle. On the other side, if the temperature is too high, your product will burn. Different sources recommend an average baking for 15 to 30 minutes. Personally, I often bake my items for 30 to 60 minutes, even longer sometimes. As I mentioned earlier, the thicker the product, the longer it takes to bake. For example, if I use Prima polymer clay and my item is up to 6 mm thick, I bake it for 30 minutes. If the item is thicker than 6 mm, I would bake it longer than 30 minutes. Do not be afraid to bake your polymer clay for more than 30 minutes. Overheating depends on the temperature, not on the time. Worst case scenario, there will be a slight color change. However, if you properly follow the baking temperature instructions, polymer clay will not suffer from a long stay in the oven. Rather, they will become more durable. This works and vice versa. If you put polymer clay into the oven on a low temperature, the item in the oven could stay for many hours. Therefore, unfortunately, it will not bake properly. If you have a large and thick enough polymer clay item, then there is a risk that the thing will be baked only on the outside and the inside will remain raw. This would result in the item becoming more fragile and eventually it would collapse with time. Then a foil is inserted inside the item, which reduces the clay layer thickness and avoids underbaking. Let's perform a little experiment. The goal is to bake clay at different temperatures and at different times and notice the changes. For samples, we'll take two brands, Timo and Primo. On the left side is Primo clay and on the right side is Timo Professional. The upper rows are baked at a temperature of 275 Fahrenheit or 135 Celsius degrees. The second row at 250 Fahrenheit or 120 Celsius, and the lower row at 200 Fahrenheit or 90 Celsius. Raw pieces of clay for comparison. Both brands of clay baked for 5, 15, 30, 60, and 90 minutes. Because I didn't have enough Primo clay for the samples, I used my old Primo clay for the top row. Above is the old clay and below is the new one that I required later. Let's start with Primo. Samples are baked at a temperature of 200 Fahrenheit or 90 Celsius and 250 Fahrenheit or 120 Celsius, that is lower than necessary. Clay has not changed in color yet. At the recommended temperature 275 Fahrenheit or 135 Celsius, the color does change. I'm very surprised by the results. It may also be due to the fact that I used old clay for them. For verification, I will bake the samples again at the same temperature but using the new clay this time. These Prima samples were baked for 30 minutes, 275 Fahrenheit or 135 Celsius, 250 Fahrenheit or 120 Celsius, and 200 Fahrenheit or 90 Celsius. As you can see, there is a slight difference in the colors. These Prima samples were baked for 60 minutes, 200 Fahrenheit or 90 Celsius, 250 Fahrenheit or 120 Celsius, 275 Fahrenheit or 135 Celsius. We also see a difference in color. If you compare the raw clay Primo and Fimo, you see Fimo is more snow white. Let's move on to Fimo now. Recommended baking temperature by manufacturer is 265 Fahrenheit or 130 Celsius. Fimo noticeably changed color in all samples except the lower row, where it was baked at a temperature of 200 Fahrenheit or 90 Celsius, which is much lower than recommended. If we talk about the difference in color between 60 and 90 minutes, as we see there is no difference in color in Fimo. Also, there is no color difference in baking Primo for 60 or 90 minutes. This indicates that with prolonged baking time, but at the right temperature, clay does not change much in color. Now, let's test our samples for durability. As we see, Primo easily breaks at the low temperature of 200 Fahrenheit or 90 Celsius degrees, though it may be baked for 1 hour and a half. This suggests that if baked at low temperature but too long, the clay will not bake properly. Samples baked at a temperature of 250 Fahrenheit or 120 Celsius, which is slightly lower than the recommended temperature, broke with little difficulty. However, samples that stayed in for 30 to 60 minutes are much more sustainable. It took great effort to break samples that are baked at 275 Fahrenheit or 135 Celsius, however. Not to mention, some samples could not be broken at all. This suggests that at or above the recommended temperature, the clay becomes stronger. To break the 90-minute samples was the most difficult. Now into checking Fimo for strength. Similar to Primo, Fimo breaks easily and quickly if it's baked at a low temperature of 200 Fahrenheit or 90 Celsius, though it may be baked for 1 hour and a half. At a temperature of 250 Fahrenheit or 120 Celsius, clay breaks with great difficulty. Cracks are produced due to air bubbles in the clay. This means the clay is not well mixed before baking. Air was trapped inside polymer clay. There was an air bubble. At a temperature of 250 Fahrenheit or 120 Celsius, I could not break anything except the sample that was baked for 5 minutes. At a temperature of 275 Fahrenheit or 135 Celsius, I could not break anything. All cracks that appeared were due to internal bubbles. As in a primo, at the right temperature or just above the recommended temperature, clay is only becoming stronger. Here again, an air bubble. Looks like I was cutting corners on this project. I decided to bake more samples using a new package of Primo clay by the temperature of 300 Fahrenheit, which is higher than recommended by the manufacturer. The result looks whiter than that of the samples I made from old Primo clay, except the ones baked for 60 and 90 minutes. 60 and 90 minutes burned. We see it has glossy red spots on the back. As we can see, Primo samples at the high temperature of 300 Fahrenheit or 150 Celsius with baking times of 30, 60 and 90 minutes did not result in breaking. Even at higher than recommended manufacturer temperatures, clay became stronger, yet the color darkened. As I previously said, old Primo darkened at the 275 Fahrenheit or 135 Celsius. It confused me, so I decided to make more samples at the same temperature, only using new clay though. New Primo stayed brighter, unlike the old Primo. Also, the color has not changed at the recommended baking temperature. Above is the new Primo clay and below is the old. Let's try its durability too. New clay at a temperature of 275 Fahrenheit or 135 Celsius is durable. I was able to break samples baked for 5 and 15 minutes only. The color has not changed during long baking, as there is no difference between 30, 60 and 90 minutes in color. From this experiment, we can conclude that Primo white changes color significantly at any temperature except when it's too low, but it's stronger than Primo white. Primo white practically does not change color only at a very high temperature and with very long baking. If color is a priority for you, I would choose Primo white. And if strength is your priority, then I suggest using Primo white. We also see, the less we bake the clay, the more fragile it is. And the more it is baked, the stronger it becomes. Even if the clay baked for more than an hour, nothing would happen to it. The most important thing is right temperature. Let's not forget, air bubbles trapped inside polymer clay may lead to cracking after baking. Also, if your clay is an older style, after baking may be more visible color change. As you can see from the experiment, you can make your polymer clay stronger, either by slightly increasing the temperature or increasing the baking time. I will tell you one secret. Most polymer clay is heat tolerant. Polymer clay manufacturers recommend not to exceed the temperature, but it will not burn at a few degrees above. I often get the question, can I bake clay many times? And my answer is yes. That is the excellent property of polymer clay. It can be baked many times. I often do things that need to be supplemented with details in stages. A gingerbread house, for example. Sometimes I bake something 5 to 8 times and the clay does not suffer from this. If your item consists of many parts and requires phased baking, then do not be afraid to put in the oven the same item several times. If I bake an item in multiple stages, 5 minutes is enough for the clay to solidify a little. And then I add some detail and then bake it again. Also, I often freeze my items in the freezer for a cleaner cutting. After bringing the items from the freezer, it is necessary to wait until it becomes room temperature before baking it. You may wonder why you often see 30 minutes of baking in my video tutorials. When I make a video, I cannot give you an exact recommendation on temperature and time because that depends on the clay brand you decide to use and the size of the product. But I usually indicate the approximate baking time. If I indicate the time to be, for example, 50 minutes, then there is a big chance that newcomers to polymer clay who don't know all the nuances can burn their creations. Therefore, do not be alarmed by hearing that I have been baking my products for a long time.
Thank you for watching my video. I hope it was helpful to you. If you have any questions, please ask me in the comments below. And please subscribe to my channel not to miss new videos. See you soon.